So, just wanted to post a response video to Alexander McKay's recent broadcast regarding Perfidious Albion. I enjoy his contributions and watch them regularly. I don't know that I really agree with his position on what I would call the left opposition historically in the Soviet Republic, but whatever. That was like almost 100 years ago. Um, uh, in terms of the immigration question, however, I've had long bitter experience with that. Mostly, living in Chicago for 24 years, and I was active, with kind of the populist and left wing of the Green Party from 1999 to about 2011 or so, until they became a mess after they sold out, to the Democrats, thanks to Medea Benjamin and Ben Mansky and other, scum. Excuse me. But for the last 15 years in Chicago, I was a federal anti-corruption hire, what they call a Shackman hire. Excuse me. Uh, Whatever pollution here in northern Leningrad, where I am, is not the greatest. Got the air purifier running. But what was I going to say? So, yeah, so I was a Shackman hire with the city of Chicago. And originally, I was active with, friends in the Green Party, and we supported, like legalization of Mexican, migrants, for example. There was like a million, whatever it was, Mexican march or something. I think I was at that march. No, I don't think I know I was at that march. And, I was, up to a certain point, I was pro open borders. But then, I started working as a Teamster. Um, and, I was working in like airport logistics, you know, uh, whatever, snow removal, maintenance of the sidewalks, etc. Um, uh, Cleanup of posts on and off the airfield, driving the laborers and janitors around there, and then fixing potholes in the city, and driving the service truck or 20 tons or 10 tons for the water department in Chicago, mostly on like water pipe replacement projects. So in that work, I should say that work was stolen by our Irish American mayor, who, I guess with the connivance or indirect connivance maybe, of, Barack Obama, who, came from our town. And they used the '09, '08, '09, 10 crisis as an excuse basically to further privatize the city department, steal the work of 200 mostly black um, Teamsters, and hand that work over to the mafia, who then used illegal migrants, mostly Ukrainian, Mexican, some Latin American, and these people had barely had papers, if that, uh, expired licenses, and no business being on the roads with 60, 80,000 pound trucks, and they would then the contractors would then rape the taxpayers, who the yuppies don't care as long as the working class is getting screwed. So but that was like a 400% corruption tax during the time I was like helping to organize against that, lead pickets, etc. And the migrants themselves were very nasty. They gave no fucks. They're like, yeah, we're stealing your work. What are you going to do about it? And I would have shot them, or driven them the hell out. Beaten them. And still intend to do so. If the manure contraption collapses in Chicago, I'll go back there and take out the trash. Like half that city is trash that needs to be disposed of or deported. So, but in regards to the historical political question of open borders. There was a book, you can find my review of it in a previous video, and, it was pretty well researched and written about the First International and Marx and, the role of trade unions starting up in England. And, went to shit in the end because, the European working class just sold out to imperialism, of course. But in it, the authors basically elucidate that there were two major planks in the First International. The first one was international solidarity, and by that they meant mostly Western Europe, but that did extend to India towards the end of the life of or middle end of the life of the First International. And yeah, so uh, anyway, there wasn't a lot. There was reach, I guess. There was limited reach. The English, British, whatever trade unions were able to affect solidarity within Western Europe, but they were underfunded by the major trades, who just didn't see the point of international solidarity because they enjoyed whatever labor market logistical advantages, domestically in England. I think was it the miners or I know the machinists, what you call engineers, I guess. They didn't really support the First International. It was more the light industries like shoemaking, I think, and textiles. Excuse me. The earlier industries, and then the more industrial crafts, they didn't really see a need to support the First International. But be that as it may, the second plank was a ban on the importation of foreign strikebreakers. And, it was a dialectic, right? Like, of course, you support workers in this case, it would have been whatever the Low Countries, I guess, whatever, I'm not really that familiar with all the geography and history of Western Europe, but out in other countries in Western Europe, they would, I guess it was because England was a center of capitalism and those other countries were lagging behind England. When there was a labor dispute, the capitalists in England would try to bring in workers from whatever the same craft in, I don't know, let's say Belgium. And the English workers would appeal to the class solidarity of the Belgian workers, and the Belgian workers would say, yeah, okay, great, we understand, we'll go back. And, that way, most labor disputes were won in that period. The First International, I guess, at a certain point enjoyed significant popularity among basically the members or, of the union or the crafts involved. In terms of, the EU and, like, let's say Bulgarian, migrants, or worse yet, or as bad, Polish migrants, you have a bunch of basically lumpen peasant workers who, I've seen this in Chicago. There's no regard for, any sort of, or very little, class regard for, workers from what I've heard from comrades in England, little to no regard for, like construction workers on site in London. The Polish scabs just have flooded in there for probably 20 years now. And, they just destroyed the construction industry for the native English working class. Similarly, thankfully, after, 2010, the Poles left Chicago. God, they're horrible. Right-wing, anti-Semitic, racist, and anti-public sector. The Arabs are like that. I drove in the cab lot. I drove mostly black laborers and janitors, a lot of Uncle Toms, who basically had racialist sympathies for the African migrant workers, but and I'll say, maybe they're marginally better than, say, a Lebanese phalangist who we had working there too, and who absolutely hated, like the native black population, the public sector, anyone who's actually American. But anyway, more to the point structurally. Um, uh, I was in the super liberal organization Solidarity for a number of years, kind of like you were, Alexander. And what was it? We had an educational by an organizer from United Electrical Workers, and they were trying to organize the warehouses in like the southern Chicagoland. And when I asked this organizer, higher ranking guy in UE for whatever that was worth, but I said, well, um, what are the national characteristics of the organizing there? What are the dynamics there? And basically he said, when they handed out union cards, the white and the black workers were, pretty much immediately ready to sign up. But, almost all of the Mexican workers refused to sign a card. And why is that? Well, I had an acquaintance who lived in New Orleans for a number of years, and rebuilding New Orleans after Katrina, the contractors would bring in, an army, hordes of Mexican scabs, instead of, trying to hire, the native black and whatever Cajun, even, etc., hillbilly perhaps populations. And what happened? So, uh, and my friend was like living in that area, and he said, yeah, the Mexican migrants would live 10 to a room. They'd have one woman cooking for them, like the cheapest shit food, and they'd send every dollar back to Mexico to build like second haciendas, two haciendas, and then they'd fuck off back to Mexico, after some years of scabbing on the Native American working class. Never going to join a union, and going to be hostile, even commit crimes, be leer at the native, female population, give the finger to the male population. Oh yeah, I'd experienced that too. Just Latin lumpen scum. They better pray. The city doesn't collapse, because yeah, they've got it coming. So. What? So yeah, now at the same time, when I was flyering for Rich Whitney, gubernatorial Green Party candidate in Grant Park, I will give the Mexicans, like half of them, or more than half, it would take the flyer. They're very interested. Green New Deal, whatever you think of that. But, black population, like 90+% of them would take the flyer. Whites, 40% would take it. Most of them would sneer at you, and that was in the period, or the after the period of, kick their ass, take their gas, invade Iraq, etc. So, of course, there are huge problems among, the whatever you want to call it, let's say the white population, there. And, to a certain extent, I don't have a lot of sympathy for them, to the extent that they're backing U.S. invasions of other people's lands, of course. But at the same time, those other peoples, there are huge problems there. I mean, I respect, let's say, Somali cab drivers who, when I wore my KPRF scarf in the cab lot, in Chicago, they genuflect to it and, remember positively the Soviet legacy of Somalia, let's say, and okay, great, but Poles or Lebanese, just basically fascists there, and just or Central Asian, even Russian scabs. These people, I wouldn't even call them workers. They're just, lumpen pieces of shit who come to steal money. And, a Greek buddy of mine, he was working in London, he said, these Greek socialist idiots back in Greece, they have no idea how nasty and corrupt the West is, and, the kind of scum that goes there. Um, it's just, and he said to some Latin American working in London, he was like, why are we here? He's like, we're just stealing money. We're not contributing to the society. And, that's what, these migrant scum are there for, is basically to disrupt, divide, sow chaos, sow terror. I mean, I had to carry guns and point guns at some of these Latin criminal scum, who the Irish scum sent to try and terrorize me over Green Party versus Democrat issues. And my only regret is they didn't show me a gun. I couldn't kill them. But similarly in England, I think if you have an honest conversation with, uh, of course it's going to maybe differ somewhat by sectors, but I think if you had a real honest, holistic conversation with, you know, English, the lower third of English society, who's been most damaged by these migrants scabs, they'd be for mass deportations. That's why Labour and Jeremy Corbyn lost, because as Dino the pipe fitter of Highgate said, he's a cunt. He's a left liberal cunt. So, basically who hate workers. So, um, of course, reparations are due, in part to what, or let's just say, it's a great thing that the Sahel is kicking out France and America, and, I wish Africa the best. Yemen, it's wonderful what they're doing. I mean, when these masses there, act as, you know, citizens of their own country and, drive out the Western imperialists, that's wonderful. Or attack the Western imperialists like the Yemenis are doing. Wonderful. But, I'm over here in Russia, half my family's Russian, and, I just got sick and fed up with Chicago and the U.S. They're idiots, and they're too liberal, and, the Russians here hate, most of the Central Asian migrants and the people from the Caucasus because they're barbarians. I mean, overwhelmingly, and they're just brought here as scabs. So, they have a bit more sense. And, but, the people in the old Warsaw Pact nations, most of them are, slimy scabs. They're just there to, steal. But, of course, yeah, their societies were wrecked by, traders in the West, too. So, it's more complex, right? But at the same time, I just, deport them, but, encourage whatever, like then, it'll just have to be those people get mad and kill and drive out the West and kill their own compradors and rebuild their own societies maybe, or, work with Russia possibly. Although, my cousin from Moscow said, yeah, the joke about Bulgarians is, in some battle historically, the Russians came to the aid of Bulgarians, I guess, against the Turks and saved Bulgaria. And the joke was, congratulations, Bulgaria is your friend, but, unfortunately now Bulgaria is your friend, and they will always stab you in the back. But, so, what? Yeah, so, I've lived for a little while in the Balkans, etc., and, these are weak, divided places, and, they need the example of a stronger, more civilized society like Russia or China or whatever, the proletariat, the masses there, because, we've seen the principle of whatever international revolution proved in the negative in the last 30 years by, Russia being thrown into the mud, and, all of these failed nations of the former Warsaw Pact flooding over to, the more civilized but traitorous imperialist countries. So, and viciously attacking the working class there. So, okay, I don't have a lot of sympathy for a lot of workers or petty bourgeois in the imperialist countries, but I don't. That doesn't extend then to sympathy for scum from the former Warsaw Pact or Ukro Nazis, Yugo Nazis, coming over. So.